Imagine your heart hammering so hard you can see your chest moving. Your hands won't stop shaking. You can't eat, can't sleep. Your doctor looks you in the eye and says, "It's all in your head." Now imagine 121 people in the same region. Strangers, families, children, grandparents, all experiencing the exact same thing at the exact same time. This isn't a virus, it isn't in the water, and the last time it happened in another town 100 miles south, the cause was never found. What was poisoning these people, and why couldn't anyone stop it? There's a stretch of flat land where South Dakota bleeds into Minnesota, endless wheat fields stitched together by two-lane roads, grain elevators standing like sentinels against a sky so wide it makes you feel small. The towns out here have names you forget the moment you hear them: Valley Springs, Laverne, Garretson. Places where people measure wealth in acres, not dollars, where neighbors leave their doors unlocked and gossip travels faster than the wind. It's 1985, Reagan's in the White House, farm subsidies are drying up. But the people of Valley Springs, population barely 800, aren't the type to complain. They endure blizzards that bury fence posts. They endure drought that turns topsoil to powder. They set their jaws and keep moving. So when the sickness arrives, they do what they've always done. They try to push through it. It starts with small things. A farmer named Richard Jacobson notices his hands trembling at the breakfast table. Not every morning, just enough to make him set down his coffee cup and stare at his own fingers like they belong to someone else. A nervous jitter he can't explain. Some days it fades. Other days it crawls through his whole body like electricity with nowhere to go. 10 miles east in Laverne, Minnesota, a man named Tony Dispinet jolts awake at 3 in the morning. Something heavy is pressing on his chest. Not pain exactly. Pressure, like someone is sitting on his ribcage. His wife drives him to the emergency room, convinced he's having a heart attack. Doctors run every test they have. His heart is fine. But something is very, very wrong. Jane Nettestad, a woman who has never missed a day of work, never seen the inside of a therapist's office, never had a single complaint about her mental health, suddenly can't stop shaking. Chills rip through her body 1 minute, hot flashes the next. She can't keep food down. The world feels too fast, too loud, like someone cranked the dial on reality and snapped the knob off. Her doctor studies her chart, studies her face, and delivers the diagnosis no one wants to hear. Nervous breakdown. He admits her to the hospital, puts her on a mood elevator, a chemical leash meant to calm the storm inside her skull. 8 hours later, Jane's heart rate hits 160 beats per minute. The monitor screams. Nurses rush in. She lies there, gripping the bed rails, certain her chest is about to split open. This isn't a breakdown. This is something else entirely. And it's spreading. Word travels in small towns the way smoke travels through an open window. Slowly at first, then all at once. At the feed store, after church, over the fence between properties. You too? Same thing happened to my wife. My neighbor's been in bed for 2 weeks. People start counting. 5 cases in Valley Springs, then 8, then a dozen. Men and women, young and old. No pattern anyone can see. The symptoms are identical. Racing hearts, fevers that spike and vanish. Muscle aches so deep they feel like the bones themselves are bruised. Weight falling off bodies that can't afford to lose it. Diarrhea, tremors, an edginess that makes people snap at their children, then sit in their trucks afterward wondering what's happening to them. And here's where it gets unsettling. Some of them have gone to doctors. Some have been sent home with flu diagnoses. Others have been told it's stress or a virus, or just the hard prairie life catching up to them. But nobody, not a single physician in 2 states, can explain why dozens of unrelated people are collapsing with the same constellation of symptoms in the same narrow corridor of the Great Plains. When Richard Jacobson finally sees a specialist, he doesn't bother with pleasantries. He asks one question that changes everything. "Doc, can you tell me why there are 5 people in my small town with the exact same condition?" That question lands on the desk of Dr. Michael McMillan, a thyroid specialist who's practiced in South Dakota for 30 years. A man who has seen every variation of glandular malfunction the human body can produce. His first instinct? Jacobson is exaggerating. His second instinct, the one that saves lives, is to check. He drives to the local hospital, pulls x-rays, reads charts, and what he finds makes the hair on his arms stand up. The number of patients with thyroid-type complaints has spiked, but every single x-ray shows the same impossible thing. Their thyroids are perfectly normal. Now pay attention, because this is where the investigation takes a turn that nobody expected. Dr. McMillan does what any good detective does when the evidence doesn't make sense. He goes to the library. He pulls medical journals. He reads until his eyes ache. And then he finds it. A single paper, a case study buried in an obscure publication. The title reads, "First Ever Epidemic of Silent Thyroiditis, York, Nebraska." York, Nebraska, a farming town 120 miles south, population about the same, demographics about the same. And just 1 year earlier, 1984, the residents of York suffered an identical outbreak. Same symptoms, same confusion, same terror. The Centers for Disease Control flew in from Atlanta. They set up in the local clinic, drew blood, ran panels, interviewed every patient they could find. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the outbreak stopped. People recovered, the CDC packed up their kits, and the cause was never identified. The case went cold. And now it's happening again, in a different town, with different people, and the numbers are climbing. McMillan picks up the phone and calls the CDC. He asks for Dr. Dan Fishbein, one of the investigators who worked the York case. The message is simple. It's back. The CDC arrives in South Dakota the way the cavalry arrives in old westerns. Too late to prevent the damage, but just in time to find out who's responsible. By June 1985, there are 50 confirmed cases concentrated in 2 towns, Valley Springs, South Dakota, and Laverne, Minnesota. 50 people whose bodies are being slowly dismantled by an invisible force. Dr. Fishbein stands in a cramped county health office, staring at a map pinned with red dots. Each dot is a patient. Each patient is a mystery. The most puzzling thing, he later admits, was that we didn't know what we were looking for. Was it airborne, waterborne, foodborne? There was simply no way to tell. The investigators run the standard playbook. They interview every patient. They test the drinking water. They check for chemical spills, industrial contamination, pesticide runoff. They swab throats. They collect fecal samples. They test for every known virus that could produce these symptoms. Every test comes back negative. But the blood work reveals something chilling. Every single patient has massively elevated thyroid hormone levels. Not slightly elevated, not borderline. 8 to 10 times the normal amount. Their bodies are being flooded with hormones their own glands aren't producing. Something is forcing thyroid hormones into these people's bloodstreams, and whatever it isn't their own thyroids doing it. Think about that for a moment. 100 people, thyroid hormone levels through the roof, and not a single enlarged thyroid among them. It's like finding 100 cars with empty gas tanks, all still running. Here's something you need to understand about epidemiology. Diseases don't respect county lines, but they do respect geography. And when Dr. McMillan pins every confirmed case on a map, a pattern screams from the wall. The epicenter is Luverne, Minnesota. Cases fan outward to Valley Springs, 3 miles west. But Garrettson, a town almost the same size, just 3 miles north of Valley Springs, has 0 cases, not one. 2 nearly identical communities, same climate, same water table, same kind of people living the same kind of lives. One is riddled with disease, the other is untouched. What's different? That question eats at McMillan like acid. Because the answer isn't in the air, it isn't in the water. The tests already prove that. The answer is hiding somewhere in the daily lives of these people, in their routines, their habits, their kitchens. And then the phone rings. A woman named Rhonda Pesky calls from Sioux Falls, 40 miles west of Valley Springs. She's sick. Same symptoms, racing heart, tremors, the works. Rhonda doesn't live in the outbreak zone. She lives in a city of 100,000 people. But she has a connection to Valley Springs that Dr. McMillan finds very, very interesting. Her parents, Larry and Margaret Long, own a grocery store there. McMillan drives out to visit the Longs. He walks the aisles of their small-town store, running his fingers along shelves stacked with canned goods and bread. He asks Larry and Margaret the question he's been building toward. "Are you sick?" They shake their heads. They feel fine. "Does Rhonda buy groceries here when she visits?" She does. McMillan's eyes narrow. He asks about their products, what sells, what doesn't. And Larry Long mentions something that stops the doctor mid-sentence. They sell a specialty item, extra lean ground beef, 90% lean. People drive from 3 towns over to buy it. It's the most popular item in the store. McMillan asks the obvious question, "How often do you eat it yourselves?" Larry and Margaret laugh. "Never. We can't keep it on the shelves long enough." The Longs don't eat their own best-selling product, and the Longs aren't sick, but their daughter, who took some home on her last visit, is. McMillan takes a sample of the ground beef. He doesn't know what he's looking for, but 30 years of medical instinct are screaming at him that the answer is sitting in a butcher's display case, wrapped in white paper, priced by the pound. The case count crosses 100. Some patients look like cancer victims, gaunt, hollowed out, skin stretched over bone. Hospital workers whisper among themselves. One nurse later admits she thought a patient was dying of terminal cancer when he came in for a thyroid scan. The world's foremost endocrinologists fly in. They sit in a conference room in Sioux Falls. McMillan and Fishbein lay out every data point, every lab result, every interview transcript. The experts listen, they review, they confer. Then they shrug. We don't know what this is. But McMillan isn't done, because he's just heard about a family, a large, extended family, every member confirmed positive for thyrotoxicosis. Grandparents, parents, aunts and uncles, 8, maybe 10 people, every single one is sick. Except one, a teenage boy. Fishbein bleeds the entire family, runs every panel. The results are uniform. Elevated thyroid function across the board. Every adult, every child, except the teenager. His levels are perfectly normal. So what makes this kid different? The father works at the local meatpacking plant. He brings ground beef home for the family regularly. The whole family eats it. Mom fries up burgers. Grandma makes meatloaf. Everyone sits at the same table, eats from the same pan. Everyone except the boy. The investigators lean in. They ask the kid what he eats. He looks at them like they're crazy. "I hate meat. I eat pepperoni pizza." His father stares at the ceiling, then back at his son, then at the investigators. "He's my son," he says quietly, like he still can't quite believe it. The meatpacking plant that employs the father is the same plant that supplies the Long's grocery store. The same ground beef, the same extra lean specialty item that 90% of the affected households have sitting in their freezers. And now every investigator in the room knows exactly where to look. Samples of the ground beef are rushed to a local pathologist. Using a cryostat, a machine that flash freezes tissue into a solid block in seconds, a thin section is sliced from the frozen meat, stained, and placed under a microscope. The pathologist adjusts the lens, blinks, adjusts again. Mixed into the ground beef, nestled between the muscle fibers and fat, are unmistakable fragments of animal thyroid tissue. Animal thyroid tissue contains astronomical concentrations of thyroid hormones, hormones that survive grinding, hormones that, as it turns out, survive cooking. But finding it in the meat isn't enough. The investigators need proof that consuming it actually causes disease. Because correlation is not causation, and every scientist in the room knows the difference. Dr. Louis Braverman, the country's leading thyroid expert, designs the experiment. 2 groups of laboratory rats. One group is fed raw hamburger from Minnesota. The other is fed raw hamburger purchased in Worcester, Massachusetts, 1,000 miles away from a completely different supply chain. The Massachusetts rats eat their meals and go about their lives, calm, normal, unremarkable. The Minnesota rats go berserk, jittery, aggressive, wild-eyed. Their metabolisms spike. Their behavior becomes erratic. They exhibit every clinical sign of thyrotoxicosis. But there's a problem. People in the Midwest don't eat raw hamburger. They cook their meat well done, sometimes to the point of charcoal. If cooking destroys the thyroid hormones, the theory collapses. Braverman recruits 4 young physicians, brings them in fasting, draws their blood, then serves them each a half-pound burger, thoroughly cooked, smothered in onions, served on toast. They eat, they enjoy it, and within hours, their thyroid hormone levels begin to climb. Cooking doesn't destroy it. The hormones survive the heat, they survive the pan, they survive digestion, and they flood the bloodstream of anyone who eats that meat. The case is closed. Almost. There's still one question left, and the answer is the most disturbing part of this entire story. Public health investigators descend on the meatpacking plant in Laverne, Minnesota. It's a modest operation. Concrete floors, stainless steel tables, the metallic scent of blood and cold air. 3,600 hamburger patties leave this building every single day. They ask questions. They inspect the kill floor. They watch the butchers work. And they learn something that turns the entire investigation on its axis. This plant used to be a kosher operation. In kosher slaughter, animals are bled to death. Every drop of blood is drained. And when an animal is fully exsanguinated, something happens to the thyroid gland, a small butterfly-shaped organ nestled against the trachea, fed by an intense network of blood vessels. When the blood drains out, the gland turns from deep crimson to pale white. White is visible. White is obvious. White gets noticed. For decades, butchers at this plant saw the pale thyroid gland clearly, dissected it out with surgical precision, and sold it to pharmaceutical companies. Drug manufacturers used animal thyroid extract to produce medication for patients with underactive thyroids. It was a tidy little economy. The slaughterhouse made extra money. The drug companies got raw material, and no thyroid tissue ever ended up in the ground beef. Then 2 things changed. First, the plant stopped kosher killing. Animals were now slaughtered conventionally, and when you slaughter conventionally, the animal retains its blood. The thyroid gland stays engorged, dark red, nearly indistinguishable from the surrounding muscle tissue, invisible to the butcher's eye. Second, the pharmaceutical industry developed synthetic thyroid hormones, cheaper, more consistent, more reliable. Drug companies stopped buying animal thyroids from slaughterhouses, so the gland that was once carefully removed and sold, the gland that nature packed with enough hormones to regulate a 1,000-pound animal, suddenly had nowhere to go. It stayed in the neck. It got trimmed with the gullet muscle. It was ground up with the lean cuts, and it was pressed into patties, wrapped in paper, and sold as extra lean ground beef to families across 2 states. Nobody noticed because nobody was looking. The trimming crew worked fast. The gullet muscles, the sternocleidomastoids that run along the animal's throat, are lean, desirable cuts. They sit directly on top of the thyroid gland. One careless pass with a knife, one extra slice, and a fragment of thyroid no bigger than a grape drops into the trim pile. Multiply that by 100 animals a day, grind it all together, and you have ground beef that is, quite literally, laced with enough thyroid hormone to send an entire community's metabolism into free fall. The moment the connection is confirmed, the plant pulls every pound of ground beef off every shelf. New safeguards are implemented immediately. Butchers are retrained. Inspection protocols are rewritten. Dr. McMillan stands in his office, holding the lab results, and allows himself a single moment of satisfaction. It was almost like a eureka moment, he says later. We were thrilled. We had discovered the cause, and it was something relatively simple. Simple, a word that carries more weight than it should. Because the mechanism was simple: thyroid in the meat in the people, hormones in the blood. But the chain of failures that created it, the shift from kosher to conventional slaughter, the pharmaceutical industry abandoning animal glands, the butchers who couldn't see what they were cutting, that chain was anything but simple. It was a cascade, one domino after another, falling in sequence across decades, until 121 people in 2 forgotten prairie towns paid the price. And here's the detail that should keep you thinking long after this story ends. Remember York, Nebraska, the outbreak from 1984 that the CDC investigated and never solved. Investigators go back through the records. They trace the meat supply chain from York, and they find exactly what they expected. The same type of meatpacking operation, the same shift away from kosher processing, the same ground beef sold at the same kind of small-town grocery stores, to the same kind of families who trusted that what they were feeding their children was safe. York was never a mystery. It was a warning that went unheard because the disease vanished before anyone could catch it. The people recovered, the investigators left, and the contaminated meat was simply eaten until it ran out. If the outbreak hadn't resurfaced in South Dakota, if McMillan hadn't been curious enough to pull those x-rays, stubborn enough to call the CDC, obsessive enough to drive out to a grocery store and ask a couple why they didn't eat their own best-selling product, the cause might never have been found. And it could have spread to Sioux Falls, to Minneapolis, to cities of millions where ground beef moves through supply chains so vast that tracing the source would have been nearly impossible. All 121 patients recover. There are no fatalities. The U.S. Department of Agriculture issues new federal guidelines. The thyroid gland of slaughtered animals is now officially classified as unfit for human consumption. Trimming protocols are standardized nationwide. Every meatpacking plant in the country is put on notice. The case becomes one of the CDC's landmark teaching examples, a masterclass in epidemiological detective work. It illustrates everything a young investigator needs to understand. That diseases don't always look like diseases, that the answer is sometimes hiding in plain sight, and that one good question, asked at the right time by the right person, can unravel a mystery that stumped the best minds in the country. The people of Valley Springs and Laverne go back to their lives. They don't hold grudges, they don't file lawsuits. They fix their fences, plant their fields, and sit down to dinner with their families. They just order the chicken. If this story stayed with you, if you felt that twist land, you know what to do. Subscribe, drop a comment, and share this with someone who thinks they know what's in their food. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in your kitchen isn't the knife.